Good morning. Welcome to our class again this morning. We're continuing our series on the family of God and what makes God's family work. Not just the church, but also in your own personal family. Today we're going to look at the concept of the wife. Last week we looked at the husbands, this time we look at the wives. But I want to ask a question as we get started. What makes a family a family? Now what's interesting about that question is awfully easy to say that it's always about the people inside of it. But there are some people who are related that they don't relate well to each other. And while they may be flesh and blood family, they're not family as a unit. And so that concept is a difficult one to grasp. And to get started with this lesson, I think there's some things we need to understand about families in general, but before we can move into a wife's role. First of all relationships are built on serving the needs of others, and that satisfies your own needs. One of the big issues in families is it's reciprocal. When I give to you, I get back what I need, and when I get what I need, I give back to you. And it's back and forth and back and forth. Jesus would talk about being servants, and that's true about the home as well as the church and the world. When you serve the needs of others, you get your needs met. Part of relationship is that concept. I will give because the only way I can get what I need is to give you what you need first. And so the other part is when that happens, each will contribute to the health of a family. When the husband is giving to his wife and his wife responds by giving to him, and she gives to him and he responds by getting from her. When children are getting what they need, they will give the parents what they need. All of those things work together, that they contribute to the health of a family. When you don't have everyone contributing, you have a breakdown of the family. That's what tends to happen when you have difficulties. Somebody is not contributing their part to the family. But what we learned last week was this very simple idea that family relationships complete each member of the family. You remember what it said in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18. Then the Lord God said, "It's not good that a man should be alone or in pieces or separated or with holes in them," as we learned last week. "I will make a helper fit for him." We are not complete in a family until we are members of that family. They complete us. Husbands complete their wives, wives complete their husbands, as we're going to see today, as we kind of close that loop from last week. And so last week what we said was that husbands, what they will do with their family, they will contribute some things. They will contribute things like physical protection. They have strength, they have protection. The wife is the weaker vessel, as Peter would say, and so he contributes to the protection of his family. He provides for physical and financial support. He does become a breadwinner, and Paul emphasizes that to Timothy, that if a man won't take care of his own, he's worse than an infidel. But then there's also that concept of spiritual guidance. He gives spiritual guidance to his family. We saw the example of Abraham last week building altars wherever he went. And where he went, he established the family altar. He became the leader of the family. And so that was the expectation that you begin to see for husbands. But they gain something in response. Remember, when you give, you get back. One of the things they get back, they get the respect of their wives. Husbands always need the respect of their wives. They need to be able to say, no matter what I've done, this woman believes in me. And that's a strong marriage. Second thing they get is companionship. As God pointed out, that it is not right, good for a man to be alone. That means male, it means female, but especially men. Men tend to be friendless. They tend not to make relationships. And so in marriage, they form a very basic, very deep, very intractable bond that cannot be broken. And they need that. And that's what they get from marriage. So this week, though, because we looked at husbands last week, this week we're going to come to the other side of the coin, to the wife in the family. So what do we learn about wives? I thought we'd start today with one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. It is a story about a woman whose name is Abigail, and she is married to a man whose name is Nabal. And Nabal, he's literally what he is. He is a fool. And we'll see that as we go through this story. This illustrates an interesting problem of husbands and wives and how they handle things together and how they should handle things. We read in 1 Samuel chapter 25, 2 and 3 that the setup is there. There is a man, he lives in Carmel, he's very rich. He's got 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats, and he's shearing his sheep in Carmel. He's a very wealthy man for the time. And it says his name was Nabal. Now I can almost hear when they would relate this story out loud, how the snickers might be there. His name is Nabal, fool, but the name of his wife was Abigail. And the woman, it says, was discerning and beautiful. She understood her husband. She understood the ways. She was an attractive woman. I've always wondered how in the world did Nabal end up with Abigail? Because it tells us he said he was harsh and badly behaved. He was a boor. I don't know why they added he was a Calebite. But he's a boor. He's one of those fellows you really don't want to be around. How in the world Abigail lived with him, I don't know, except that she has learned how to deal with the hardest of husbands. Something that some wives always have to do. And when you continue the story, David has gotten himself in trouble. He's fleeing from Saul and he needs provisions. So he goes to people who he can help in exchange. One of the things he'll provide protection for shepherds in their field to keep them being raided by marauders. It was a constant threat. He was offering to do this in exchange for some provisions and some help and some food. But Nabal will have none of it. He says, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who have come from I do not know where?" Obviously, he is looking a gift horse in the mouth. And he's going to do the wrong thing. He's going to reject David's pleas. And so David is angry, wrathful. He's ready to take his pound of flesh out of Nabal. So he tells his servants, his soldiers with him, he said, "Strap on your swords, boys, we're going hunting." And they all strapped on their swords, and David put his on too, and he got 400 men together, and they were going to go up there, and they were going to wipe out Nabal and everything he had. He was loaded for bear, and he was going to take care of this harsh, horrible human being one way or another. So servants had heard about this, and they rushed to Abigail. And they said, "We don't know what to do. The master has said these terrible things, and this is an honorable man who can help us, he can befriend us." And Abigail knew exactly what to do. She makes haste. She gets busy. She makes 200 loaves of bread. She takes 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep that's been prepared for meals, and grain for flour, and raisins, and cakes of figs, and she puts them on donkeys, and she says to her servants that, "You go on, and you take these to David." But she didn't tell her husband Nabal. He would have been furious. And so as she rode the donkey, she came down and she saw from a distance David and his men coming down the road toward them. Now think about this. David's absolutely angry. He is irate. He's ready to kill people. And here he meets this woman on the road who is the wife of the man he seeks to kill. And so when Abigail meets David. She gets down from the donkey and bows before him. She's very respectful. She's very quiet. And she takes the guilt on herself. Put it on me if you have to. But let me tell you what I know. My Lord, my husband, he's a worthless fellow. Nabal is his name. And as his name is, his folly is with him. He's just as foolish as his name. But I was told that you are helpful. And so he says, please, David, do not do this. Do not have guilt on your hands. Do not have blood on your hands. She is concerned about how David is going to be seen and how he's going to appear before God. She's very much concerned about that. And so she says, I brought you these things, but please let Nabal and all of us live because my husband is a fool. And David's anger abates. And he says to her, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion. And blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. You have stopped me from doing something I wish I wouldn't have done later. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there would have been left to Nabal not so much as one man. Abigail solves the problem. Now, when she goes back and tells Nabal what she's did and what David's prepared to do, he's absolutely terrified and he dies of a heart attack. And David is so impressed with her, he marries her. That makes a great impression. One of the things, and this is something that I've taken out of this story forever, because it has everything to do with wives and their husbands. A good wife can make up for a foolish husband. I got to tell you, husbands are not always the brightest thing in the world. They think they are, but we're all brusque. We do things. We're going to make things. We're impetuous. We know what to do. And a lot of times the wife can ease us off the gas pedal and change something and make things a lot more quiet to where we don't get ourselves in trouble. Wives can take care of and make up for a foolish husband. And that's true for a lot of reasons. Wives, by their nature, are different than their husbands. And that's a blessing. And so, how does a wife contribute to the family and to her marriage? Just as the husband contributed to certain things, so do wives. So what do wives do? Well, the first thing they contribute is what the husband needs. Remember last week we talked about husbands need the respect of their wives. The person who sees them at their worst, they need to know somebody respects them. And that's what a wife contributes to this situation. No matter what the husband is like, she still respects him. Even Abigail did that with Nabal. She took care to make sure she didn't ruffle his feelings. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, likewise, wives should be subject to their own husbands, even as some do not obey the word. In other words, some of you are living with non-Christian husbands, and they're abusive perhaps. They are at least neglectful. They could care less about your spiritual lives. He's painting the worst possible picture for a wife here. You're living with someone who doesn't respect your values. But he says, but they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. They have an influence, a silent influence, a tug, a pull, a magnetism that needs to be done. When they see your respectful and pure conduct. He talks about a wife who is having the word is fear, but that's not really the best way to put it. It's really respect. It's the same kind of respect you have for other things. I remember when I was probably 7 years old, 6, 7 years old. We had an electrical problem at my house when I was growing up, and we had a fellow in the congregation where we grew up who was a retired electrician. So my dad called him and said, "Can you come over here?" And Mr. Shattuck came over. And I remember he went to the fuse box that was on the wall, and he got me, he said, "I want you to look at this carefully. Do you understand? I want you to be very careful because this thing could really hurt you. So when you get around this, you need to be very, very cautious and very careful. You need to respect it." Now, I was 6 years old. But I learned at 6, there's some things that you always respect. You have a healthy respect for. Even to this day, I go to the fuse box, I think about Mr. Shattuck as I carefully reach for things that I know are not going to bother me. But it's still ingrained. That's the same kind of idea. I have this respect for God's order and what God has put together. Even if He's a worthless human being, I still can respect on the basis that God told me to do that. Then he goes on to say, in verse 6, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. Now, I want you to put this into context. Abraham was the father of the faithful. He was not a perfect person. He lied about his wife twice, and both times put her in jeopardy to save his own neck. Doesn't sound like somebody who is very respectful, but she kept doing what he wanted her to do. And what Peter has to say is, if you'll have that kind of respect for your husband, if you'll use your influence through your example, if you'll show him that you care, if you show him that things are good, life will go better because he will respond in a different way. One thing a wife brings is respect for her husband, something that she will have to show to him for her children to show to him as well. Children understand, if mama doesn't care for daddy, why should I? It's a very difficult thing, but it's important. But she also provides a model of conduct. One of the things that Peter says in that same passage is, when they see your respectful and pure conduct, when they look at your life, they can't find anything except maybe your faith that's the fault you for. You live to a higher level. When a wife lives to a higher level, she will lift her family. She will be the one that shows the example. We usually think that men should be the example, and they should. I'm not giving them free clearance on that. But I do know this, that most of the time, if you look at children, they are going to probably follow the example of their mother, even in difficult times. This model of conduct is important because it brings a different dynamic to a family. But she also gives something called gentle nurture. Men are harsh. We see everything as a nail, and so the only tool we have is a hammer. It's easy to get hardened. It's easy to bark orders. But a wife can do so much more. Paul, when he wants to tell you about how he dealt with people, he says, I learned something about this from watching my mother. In 1 Thessalonians 2 and verse 7, he writes back to the Thessalonian church, but we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. When Paul wanted to treat people well in the church, he thought about what a mother would do. He would nurture them. He would care for them. He would say soft, kind words. He would help them. Even if they were sinning, he would try to help them along. See, nurture is what mothers tend to do best. Fathers don't tend to do that as well. They can do it, but not as well as mothers can. And so when a child hurts, for instance, they always run to their mother. I've watched situations where the father says, stop doing that. And the mother steps in and says, come here for a moment. Let's talk about this. Do you know what you did? Are you happy with what you did? And the child begins to soothe. That's what happens with a mother there. A wife provides this gentle nurture. Think about Abigail, what we looked at just a moment ago. Abigail had a gentle nature. When things were coming unwound, she knew how to appease. She knew how to soften. She could take the most irate soldier and make him into jelly. She knew what to do to an angry and belittling husband to make him docile. That takes nurture. And wives contribute this nurture to their families in other ways. But they also provide order. Now there's a passage that we basically bang out of shape. And it's in Titus chapter 2, verses 3 through 5. And when I was growing up, this passage was used to prove that women should stay home and keep the kids and cook dinner and iron the shirts and do the laundry and sweep the floors and just be the domestic servant of her husband. And you see that portrayed in cartoons and in sitcoms of the day. Mom stays home, takes care of everything, and that's all it takes. Now, I think that's a cultural standard, not Paul's standard. When you read the passage, it says, older women likewise should be reverent in their behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. In other words, older women should have learned better by that time. But they are to teach what is good, and so train younger women to love their husbands, we've said that before, and their children, we've said that before, to be self-controlled, pure, we talked about that, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands. The word of God may not be reviled. That concept of working at home, I want you to think about that for a moment. There's the problem. We have always put a aura around that said this is domesticity. You stay home, you work yourself to a bone, you make sure the food is bought, you make sure it's prepared, you do everything, and your husband comes, you hand him pipe and slippers, and you're taken care of. Now, I always like what Jim Bill McIntyre told. He told a story about a man and his wife that went to the doctor for a doctor's appointment, and the doctor came out and he told the man, he said, "Why don't you sit here? I need to talk to your wife by herself." And so he invites her in, and he starts talking. He said, "Now, I want to tell you something." He said, "Your husband is in really bad shape. And what you're going to need to do is you need to let him sleep as long as he'd like. And then when he awakes, make sure that you have his favorite breakfast cooked for him and on the table hot and ready for him to eat. And then after breakfast, make sure he gets in his favorite chair and make him comfortable and give him the remote and let him turn on whatever station he is. You make sure things are taken care of and don't disturb him though. And at lunch, fix him what he really likes and make sure it's good and it's tasty the way he wants it. And then make sure you tuck him in and he has a nice, comfortable nap. He does what he wants to. At dinner time, fix his favorite meal. And then make sure he goes to bed and he's comfortable, he's tucked in. Make sure you do all of those things just the way he likes it. And he'll survive. But if you don't, he's going to die. Well, the woman goes back out in the waiting room and the husband's on pins and needles. And so he says, "What did the doctor say?" And she looked at him and he said, "You're going to die." See, there's the humor of that story is the stretched out truth. When Paul tells Titus about working at home, the word he uses there is the word for manager. She is to be the home manager. She is to make sure it works, which means he can't. I'm always amazed that the wives know how to make the house work better than the husbands do. She is supposed to be the home manager, and that's what that passage says, not just the servant of the husband. She has a role of providing the order needed for the household. And households need lots of order. Kids need to be gotten up in the morning. They need to be gotten off to school. They need to have lunches packed. They need to have, their clothes need to be washed. There are things, and women many times do a lion's share of things and even work. This does not forbid working, but it does say that wives tend to have a pretty important role in the family, more so than their husbands at times. But then let's turn to the other side. What do wives receive from their families? One thing they get is enduring admiration. From time to time, when I do funerals for women, their families always say what we want read at her funeral is Proverbs chapter 31. It is the proverb that talks about the wife of noble character. In that, the wise man says, her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you have surpassed them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. Mothers get remembered. There's a reason that Mother's Day and Father's Day are not the same. Mother's Day, they get taken out to eat, they get roses, they get presents. When Father's Day get there, they get a tie and the bill at dinner. Why? Because mothers get the heart. How many times have you panned in a football game or a baseball game, they come across an athlete and he waves at the camera and he says, "Hi, Mom." He's remembering the mother who raised him. Why? Because we always remember our mothers. We even remember them when they're gone. And they are part of us. But it also gives mothers, they have something else that they receive. They give it, but this is really a receipt. They receive eternal influence. They have the satisfaction of knowing they have changed lives in ways that no one else can. When Paul addresses Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 1, he talks about him to him very personally. After all, this is his last letter. Timothy may never see him. So this is his closing shot for Timothy. And he says, "I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you." What those women received was the satisfaction of knowing they have produced a true servant of God. I want you to pay attention to what's not said there. There's not a father in the picture. We learn from Acts 16 that when Paul finds Timothy, they say that he has a Grecian father. In other words, the father doesn't really care one whit about his faith, about his character. But his mother does. His grandmother does. And they mold and they shape this future servant of God. And they could go to their grave knowing we have changed the future. Wives change the future in ways that husbands will never ever dream of. Because they touch a heart before they touch the life that changes the world. William Ross Wallace wrote a poem in which this line is read: "The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world." And that's true. Churchill, for instance, the great orator, even though he had a father who was a politician, it was his mother who shaped him. And the one who kept him sane during the Second World War was his wife, Clementine. You see that often, where the mother and the wife changed the man throughout their lives. The greatest of men have quiet wives who are shaping them and their families. Rise up and call her blessed, the wise man says. And I think as we come to a close, there's one thing that I think you can really say about wives that the Bible and the New Testament talks about. Husbands may guide. They are the directors. That's what Paul has says. He said they are the head of the wife. Husbands may guide, but the wives steer. The wives make it happen. They make families run. They help their husbands. They can be barriers or they can be assets, all depending on how they see themselves as part of God's family. But when the family that God put on this earth works, you find a good wife with great morals, deep faith, steering her family in the right direction. Next week, we're going to talk about children. I'm thankful that you joined me today. I hope you've gotten something out of this, and I'll be back with you again next Sunday. So have a great day.